start off with asking Ms. Anush Bezhanyan from the World Bank about the World Bank's perspective. Ms. Anush, can you tell us what is the extent of the damage caused by the pandemic globally and in the MENA region specifically in terms of losses of jobs and of livelihood being affected?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be part of this panel, and I would like to start by thanking FinTech Robot and the government of Bahrain for organizing it and inviting me to be part of this important discussion. And I'm thrilled to be on the distinguished panel of speakers, my colleagues that will also speak on this panel. Thank you. Indeed, in the past 2 years, the COVID pandemic had a devastating impact on the livelihoods in many countries and around the world, and these facts are now very well documented. And the World Bank actually estimates that COVID-19 pandemic has pushed about additional 16 million people in many countries into the poverty. And poverty we defined for the purposes in MENA region is living below $5.50 per day, which you can imagine is very little, yeah, to survive on. So this poverty impact had also been particularly severe in the countries that actually had compounded by other crises such as wars and other economic crises, and we see more severe impacts in Iraq, Lebanon, in Yemen, because there were pre-existing crises that actually were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we also saw a sharp decline on the jobs, yeah, because of the measures that were put in place by the government to prevent the spread of the disease. There were many job losses, and particularly in the lockdown phases of the pandemic, which also reduced the income from the jobs. And in that phase, particularly unprotected and suffering were the workers that were in the informal work, yeah? Be that in the informal sector work, vendors in the street and others, and also in the tourism sector, which is significant for the MENA region. Now, we estimate that about 41% of workers, for example, in Egypt and Tunisia, stopped working during the lockdown phase. And these were really detrimental to their incomes. So there are several signs now of recovery in 2021. Some countries actually have recorded some growth, including in the jobs, and the conditions of the lockdown have been eased in many countries, but that is not going to be enough. So yeah, that's the impact.
Right. At this point, I'd like to actually bring in Mr. Ahmed Al-Hayeki, Assistant Undersecretary for the Ministry of Labor and Social Development, specifically because, as you've said, a lot of things have been done by different governments in order to lessen this impact or this shock. The government of Bahrain actually has taken a pioneering initiative in fully paying the private sector employees' wages, especially the ones that were most affected, the sectors that were most affected during the pandemic. Mr. Al-Hayeki, what's your comment on this and the rationale behind it?
Thank you, Sara. I'm very pleased to participate in this Arab Saving Conference to represent the Ministry of Labor and Social Development in this important event. It's my pleasure to express my sincere greeting to all of you. Thank you. I think we are lucky to be in Bahrain during the pandemic. Everybody we're asking in the street how you feel, he said, thanks God we are in Bahrain. The initiative of our esteemed government ensuring the payment of wages for private sector workers is the first of its kind at the local and international level, and reflect the wisdom of our leadership in dealing with the pandemic and maintaining the standard of living of citizens in parallel with the preservation of the national economy, which it's contributed to maintaining jobs and reducing layoff and stability of labor market. Saving the jobs and creating new jobs is very critical during the pandemic. Paying the private sector's employees was on 4 periods as following. First period was from April to June 2020, government fully paid 100% of the people working in the private sector, the salary paid by the government. The second period was from July to September 2020. Bahrain government paid 50% of the wages of the workers working in the private sectors. Not all the sectors for the second time, the most affected. Third time, the government even interfered and paid from October to December 2020, they paid 50% of the most affected. Again, in 21, when the pandemic came again, even the government stepped up and paid for another 3 months from June to August. For first month in June, we're paying 100% of the salary, and in July and August, 50% of the salary. That's saved the jobs of the Bahrainis who's working in the private sectors, and it creates some jobs for the new job seekers.
Absolutely. When we look at the different endeavors, this, of course, was one of the ones that were executed by the Ministry of Labor and Social Development. Mr. Hayeki, how did this endeavor add or enrich to the social protection policy that was implemented by the ministry?
If we compare the number of national workers laid off in 2019 and during the pandemic, 2020 and 2021, the layoff was less before the pandemic for the people who's losing their job, was less than 2020, 21. Two things very important: stability of employment in their jobs. Saving the jobs was the most important issue for the Ministry of Labor, for the government of Bahrain. The second thing, maintaining at least the employment rates within their safe limit. We created new jobs for Bahraini during the pandemic 2020 and 2021, not as much as before the pandemic, but still around 50% to 60% for new job seekers, they got a job. Moreover, paying the wages of Bahraini workers in the private sector has contributed to the stability of companies in the labor market. Less company, and not even much company, they left the labor market, preventing closure and maintaining the national employment in these companies, and has further encouraged these companies to employ more Bahraini as well. Although we didn't reach our target as before the pandemic, but still, some Bahrainis, they got jobs during the pandemic.
Absolutely. These initiatives were, of course, executed and applied through cooperations between different entities, because in order to execute such a big project that will basically hold the economic basis and people's livelihoods in balance, a lot of entities and different multidisciplinary teams have to be there or included. The Social Insurance Organization was one of these very effective teams. Bahrain's GOSI, as we call it here, or Social Insurance Organization, was mandated with the implementation of a wages support program. So we're going to ask Mrs. Salma Abdurrahman Al-Sayyid, who is the Executive Director of the ID Directory at the Social Insurance Organization, to tell us how prepared was GOSI for this in terms of the data, the IT systems, and the mechanisms that were put in place.
First, I would like to thank you for having us and providing the opportunity to demonstrate the efforts and the role in mitigating the challenges posed by the recent crisis and protecting workers from income shocks. It's worth highlighting that, as you all know, that social insurance organization was originally established to collect contribution and distribute the pension, and therefore all our data, IT system, and mechanism were to serve this purpose. Therefore, we had to add a new frameworks and mechanism to accommodate our new role. By the way, it's worth noting that we were tasked to accommodate this new role within a deadline of 2 weeks only. So our implementation phase was as follows. First, determining the affected trade sector by cooperating with the MLSD, the Ministry of Labor and Social Development, to come up with an eligibility employer list. The second phase was to launch an e-service for collecting employers' IBAN based on that eligibility list. As we don't have any bank information for those employers. Then we had also to validate those IBANs with cooperating with the Central Bank of Bahrain. The next phase was to prepare the payment mechanism, as this system has to be programmed with completely differently and new rules set based on set based on a criteria for that eligibility list. The last phase was setting up the transfer to the government support payment via EFTS, the electronic bank transfer, to transfer those amounts to the employer bank accounts.
Amazing. After hearing that, we'll come back a little bit more because, of course, with every system, no matter how well planned it is out, there are always some challenges that are faced, especially when you initially set it. So I'm going to go back to Ms. Anush. First of, what socio-economic policies, after hearing from His Excellency Mr. Al-Hayeki and Ms. Selma, from your point of view, what socio-economic policies need to be in place in order to ease this kind of idiosyncratic shock, such as the one that the pandemic has done?
Thanks a lot for your question, and I am happy to learn what Bahrain has done in pandemic, and that is actually quite similar to what many other countries have done. Let me go back for a little bit to give you a picture of the social protection system in the MENA region so that we understand where the challenge lies, and then based on the challenge, we will know more what to do, yeah? So if you look at the region as a whole, only 40% of population in the region has some access to some form of social protection. And only 4% of the entire population of the region has access to social insurance. That is actually very mind-boggling. And overall, the region spends less than 1% on social protection. It's almost like lowest in the world. And you know, it's a very heterogeneous region, of course, because we have the Bahrain's, Kuwait's, and Saudi Arabia's, but we also have Yemen's and Syria's and others in the same Arab region. So this is also to keep in perspective. In any case, as I said, many governments quickly realized that just expanding this current social protection system quickly in the pandemic will not work. So they actually introduced some large ad hoc programs in the form of temporary cash transfers, for example, in Tunisia, Morocco, and Jordan. And the spending quickly raised to 150% of the pre-COVID level spending. And there were about half of the programs were in cash transfers, but they were also using social insurance mechanism and also labor market interventions, as my colleagues have mentioned, yeah? So, and such a massive response revealed two lessons and two things that we need to actually think about going forward how to improve the social protection and labor systems in order to be able to actually react to similar shocks in the future more efficiently and more effectively. So the first one is, as I mentioned, on the coverage. Those countries that actually had good programs in place, I should give you examples. Bahrain was one, for example, but also Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, they had a good system in place. So they have all the poor and near poor registered in the, for example, the Noor registry in Jordan. So they were quickly able to expand the social protection program to these people. They also were able to use their Social Security Corporation programs to actually give the wage subsidies, etc., etc. Yeah. However, there are many that did not have this. Lebanon, one example, did not have these programs in place, and they had to do some ad hoc reaction. So going forward, I think one of the policies that we need and the approach that we need for this is to actually have the a population, including those that have no access to any social protection and labor program, that are working informally, be that in the informal sector or working informally in enterprises and not being part of Social Security. We need to make sure that we have policies and programs that actually include every person and give the protection to everyone. We all in our lifetime have an event somehow have an event where we would need social protection. We get sick, we need social insurance. We get old, we need pension. So everybody should have the same access to the programs. The second thing that also was revealed by the different responses in the pandemic is that where the governments had in place good administrative and capacity and information systems and digital payment systems, which became so much more important in the pandemic, they again were able to actually react quickly and expand quickly. And some of them actually have taken dramatic measures during the pandemic to actually both expand the program and introduce new programs, such as Morocco, for example, is introduced the universal family allowance, but also introduced the payment systems that actually are more efficient. And we have seen the Jordan quickly roll out their e-wallets and Egypt to roll out Visa card during the pandemic. That's a debit card that they have for civil service, but now expanded to the social protection beneficiaries. So I think we need to both make sure that we have coverage of the social protection programs expanded, but also have the systems that can actually scale up and then shrink again when the crisis is over. The other thing that I think that going to the program types that we can actually look at, I think the one lesson that we also learned that there are very few unemployment insurance programming across the countries in the MENA region. So that is something that also needs to be looked at. And some countries have tried unemployment insurance individual savings account that have proven effective at protecting workers in a financially sustainable way. And I think we can also look at the existing scheme that would relax eligibility in response to shock, as I think the Bahrain has done, but also the wage subsidies that have proven and effective in some of the countries. And my colleague from Bahrain also mentioned it. So we believe in the World Bank in the strong social protection system that must protect all the workers when they need support in sustainable way. And this means they expand the coverage of safety nets for the poor informal workers and their families, making this program responsive to shocks, protecting formal sector workers against the risk of unemployment, and extending social security coverage to informal workers. That would be our suggestions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Before I move on to the next question, I'd like to welcome our panel member, Mr. AbdelKadir Shehabi, who is the chairman of the General Federation of the Bahrain Trade Unions. Thank you for being with us today. Going back to the initial idea, I mean, your answer about the place or where initial programs should be put in cases of idiosyncratic shocks such as the pandemic is very clear, but also these kind of shocks differ, or the situations differ. It might not be a pandemic. The next time it might be something totally different. So from your point of view, how can governments, Ms. Anush, accomplish a national social protection system that is shock responsive, no matter what the shock coming in is? And could governments be actually better prepared should there be a similar crisis or something that is a crisis but on the other end of it?
Actually, we're already in the next crisis in some countries, by the way, with the Russia-Ukraine war. We see a lot of countries actually having food insecurity going, unfolding. And many are thinking how to actually protect their citizens and their people from this shock. And one of the things, as I said, one important thing for the governments is to have a flexible and dynamic program that can react to such situation. Because if you, for example, if you only allow to new poor to enter your database every 3 years, and rather than when they need, the poor that are actually hit by the crisis today, the near poor that become poor today, cannot wait for 2-3 years to actually get access to the benefits. They should be able to come and register, declare the income, declare their assets, and say, now because of this crisis, we actually need support. That dynamics, that flexibility does not always exist because many of the countries have a fixed time on when they do the registration and when they do the recertification of the beneficiaries of the social assistance program. So flexibility and dynamics in the program, I think it's very important for the government to be able to react quickly. For that, you also need a very strong information system that actually is interoperable, that can the social protection registry can be talking in the digital terms to the national population registry, to social security databases, to unemployment databases, and all the databases that are, so the interoperability between the programs is critically important. And of course, the financial sustainability of these different programs, because one of the questions everybody is going to ask in the crisis, where do I get money? Because the general revenues may also go down. And I think there you also may want to look, governments may want to look on efficiency and of the other spending. For example, many countries have universal blanket energy subsidy on which they spend enormous amounts of money. But these subsidies actually oftentimes benefit more wealthy populations that actually have cars and several cars per household and hardly benefit any poor. There are many analyses that we have done that actually go. So coverage expansion, so everybody has an access to the flexible dynamic social protection and jobs system, but also efficiency and financial sustainability of the programs. and also interoperability of the IT and other systems are extremely important components of the social protection system that is actually shock responsive.
Absolutely. I see where you come from. I mean, having that diverse way of helping citizens and the people, the employees during such shocks are very relevant, such as the energy sector. Bahrain was very cumulative and covering a lot of aspects to subsidize a lot of things for people, not just the citizens, but also the residents. And this is where I would like to take the opportunity to address Mr. AbdelKadir Shehabi. Thank you for being with us today. Sir, we were talking generally about the different initiatives and programs that were put in place in order to alleviate any kind of suffering that will be felt by employees of many sectors. You, of course, as a representative, especially of the Bahrain trade unions, how do you, at the trade unions, look at the different initiatives that were put in place by the government of Bahrain and different entities? Did it meet your expectations for a crisis such as the one we faced, the corona pandemic?
Okay, thank you first of all for inviting me in this very important conference, especially this session. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. And I want to share our vision as General Federation of Bahrain Trade Union, which is established in August 2020, which is make like a mechanism for Bahrainis how to avoid this shock because of this corona pandemic, and try to make like a roadmap to get out from this crisis. And we send all these vision to our partners and government and employers and social societies. So in this, we try to make like a way to avoid this crisis, because a lot of production companies may be closed because, like you know, and transportation and hotels sector, a lot of people dismiss, a lot of workers dismiss, and some companies try to recover and some of them close forever. Because of that, we joined with government to use employment fund to recover what we said to the in Arabic الوقاية خير من العلاج.
To prevent.
We try to use this unemployment fund, which is we found if the government have emergency fund, it is better to use this unemployment fund. But because of the country not have such type of funds, we use around 300 million Bahraini dinar from unemployment fund to support these companies. In general, we said, okay, we can't use this money, but if we have an emergency fund, it's better than that. And in this vision, if we can take around to balance between the vital requirement, what we said like that, the vision aimed to achieve a balance between providing a decent life of retirees and from families receiving social insurance fund from actual deficient. This is the make two balance from the social justice, and we try to make this middle class of workers to be continue. Why take this fund and support the lower class? This is the mechanism, what we say. And we promote reforms to Bahrainis to job, private and public sector. We need only 3% of expert our migrant workers, which is share around 80% of workforce in Bahrain for migrant workers. So we take from this 80% to 3% to transfer to Bahrainis to prevent the insurance from deficiency. This is our mechanism in the vision, and we send it also to International Labour Organization, and all these 3% we focus on the job who gain more than 700 Bahraini dinar. We look from Bahraini market, there is around 40,000 workers gain more than 700 Bahraini dinar and more for non-national workers. So we try to take this from this 40,000 position, around maybe 15 to Bahrainis to make some balance in the labor market and to cover all these new job seeker to have decent work in Bahrain. So by this we start to replacing the national workers and expatriate workers in the government sector, which is around 7,000 workers, and extending the umbrella of social protection to expatriate workers, which is not now. We hope in the reform of the social protection program, and we put our paying an insurance contribution of full wages, and concerning the maximum insurance limit of 4,000 Bahraini dinar for insurance contribution. By this, we have to save the money and reduce the highest ceiling to the pension to 2,000 Bahraini dinar as a maximum. By this, and supplying the retirement fund with 50% of labor market fees from the Tamkeen, from LMRA, and contributing to pay annual increase, a rate of 3% annual for those pension are less than twice the median wages. We put around 1,000 Bahraini dinar. This must be take the 3% annual increment in the pension, the salary. Rising the minimum retirement pension to Bahraini wages to modulator at 500 Bahraini dinar, no less than 500 Bahraini dinar to retirement from Bahrain for everyone who has complete 35 years, and to stop the double pension in order to achieve the social justice from the private and public sector, and excluding the minister and MPs, Shura person from the social insurance fund. This must be done, and reform the public organizing for social insurance. All these must be done to reform the labor market and avoid any crisis in the future. This is the main topic. Try to balance, because we see a lot of migrant workers be in the street during this crisis before 2 years, and also social all parts in Bahrain try to support this migrant worker, because we found around 10% of labor market are illegal in Bahrain, around maybe from 80,000 migrant worker illegal in Bahrain. And they, because of Corona, they be in the street without food, without resident, without anything. So that's just this crisis, Corona crisis, floating what is inside, is floating on the surface, and we just try to solve it emergency. But now we try to make strong base to avoid any just unsuspected crisis in the future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, you talked about how a lot of the expectations that you had set for the unions or the members of the unions you represent have been, of course, met, but also there were some challenges, and we addressed that we're going to talk about this. I'm going to go back to His Excellency Ahmed Al-Hayeki. When we talk about, or after listening to some of the challenges that, of course, have been seen during the pandemic and during this impact that happened, especially that nobody was prepared for this. This was a sudden thing that happened, and we grew and we learned during our movement forward. Sir, what are the aspects that you would see want to have enhanced or added in any future kind of initiatives or endeavors after you reflect on this program?
Thank you, Sarah, again. But I think before I answer your question, I would like to elaborate a little bit about what's mentioned in this form. We in government of Bahrain, they work together. It's not, this is not from Ministry of Labor, from government of Bahrain, with all the ministries, all the firms, labor union as well, Chamber of Commerce, NGOs as well. It's teamwork in order to make sure nobody will be in the street, everybody will have safe haven. We open more accommodation for the people who doesn't have accommodation for the workers. We provide them with food, with shelter. Electricity was free for 6 months or 3 months for everybody in Bahrain, citizen, home, business, for everybody. We don't only cover the salary of the Bahrain people who's working in the private sector under the GOSI. We cover even Bahraini who works abroad, who comes to Bahrain, who cannot go back. We offer them, we pay them some subsidy in order just for living. We order for bus drivers who work in their own, taxi driver as well, for driving license instructor, trainer, we pay them as well, nursery, kindergartens, business. We cover all aspect people who need help during a pandemic. And we assure you, nobody was left in the street. Everybody have a safe haven, have accommodation, and have food as well. To answer your question, the pandemic gives us a great experience in dealing with such challenges in the future by extending its support to most affected companies in the private sectors. The government helps the companies to maintain their business and jobs. Beside this, it creates more jobs for job seekers. The pandemic has also positive impact on companies in terms of shifting to remote work model. It created pressure on the companies to invest in digital era. This investment have increased the productivity of employees both at home or at a workplace. As a result, it also creates a need of a new types of job.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And on that note, Mrs. Salma Sayed, the SIO is one of these members that are part of the solution in case of any kind of shock that is similar to that, as Mr. Al-Hayeki has mentioned. Mr. Shehabi mentioned some of the challenges that faced the trade union members, the employees of different companies. But in your position in the SIO, what can you tell us about what were the challenges that you faced as actually the data collector of all of the information and the distributor and the end effect? Were there any challenges, and what are the steps or the systems that you would would like to add to optimize the process in the future, because it is a process. We have a problem, we start solving it until we get to the optimum solution in the future. So can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you faced and how to solve them?
Some of the challenges, I've mentioned them earlier. Adding to that are the following. We did not have the IBAN of the employers to transfer the payment within the specific time, although we had created the platform. Also, we needed the resources and mechanisms to reach them out. So we mitigated this challenge by putting a communication plan. Also, naturally, some claims came through late, after the due date. Therefore, we had to reprocess the payment in several batches. Also, another challenge that we had to accommodate other process mechanisms in the system, such as refund from employers who wanted to support the government during crisis by returning back the payment made to them. So they wanted to support the government and they returned back the payments to us. So we had to have the special mechanism for this process as well. And refer to your question regarding optimization of the challenges in the near future. I'd like to say that we are already in a process of strategic alignment and integration as one block to ease data exchange between all the governmental entities. And of course, this will reduce number of steps in the process and increase speed and efficiencies.
Absolutely. Ms. Anush, I'm going to come back to you. From the audience, we have a question. Should crises like the pandemic or others encourage or force people in our region to start saving differently and maybe build their basic financial buffer, keeping in mind the challenges that are very understandable that face the governments in trying to contain and keep the economic standard as it is?
Thank you, thanks. And there was another question about the financing, the huge payments when the crisis hit, which I would also like to address along with the same question. And as I mentioned in my previous intervention, that for the financing bit, there are lots of currently, many of the governments have inefficient budget spending that actually can be redirected to a more efficient spending in order for the poor and vulnerable people to actually have better access to financing and better access to also jobs, because your labor program also and your wage subsidies also can be financed out of this efficiency gains, what I called. And in many countries, as I noted, also, and I'm glad my colleague from trade union and the government colleague mentioned that the expat workers also were covered, and also all the workers in the informal sector were covered. You know, if you look at the across the region, 40% of the workers or more than 40, actually 50% of the workers are in the informal sector. And they cannot benefit, even if you have a wage subsidy program, they cannot benefit from, yeah? And we have very difficult time we see across the world in formalization of these workers by making them to pay mandatory social security is not working. So I think what we need is to continue protecting these workers where they work, where they live, not where they work. And the instruments, and coming now to the question on the new instruments, yes, voluntary saving schemes, which actually are supported by maybe targeted subsidy for workers with the lower ability to save, can actually help expand the social insurance program to these workers. So my point being, subsidize where it actually more effective rather than have a general subsidy. And that protects the workers in the future against the unemployment or reduced income or sickness, at least in the initial crisis phase. And so, yeah, that's the, yes. So the answer is yes, let's encourage savings and yes, and have a financial buffer, but let's not also forget to help with some incentives to encourage savings.
Absolutely. And that's
you.
actually, thank you for that. That's actually what Mr. Al-Hayeki referred to in Bahrain's experience. The subsidizing was nationwide over the whole kingdom, and it specifically targeted the livelihood. So it was the energy sector. We had subsidies when it wasn't into the nourishment and food sectors as well, and people were covered. And that's why I want to go back to Mr. Shehabi. And I want to ask, I mean, as mentioned by our other panel members, the whole addressing of the pandemic and the livelihood of the people working, whether they were foreigners or residents of Bahrain or citizens, was actually a combined work between government entities, the private sector, NGOs, everybody had a part to play, as well as the trade unions themselves. They also played a very big role in supporting their members. So for a shock responsive social protection system, what could trade unions themselves do in addition to ensure that employees are protected against any kind of income disruption, be it from a pandemic or any crisis that might be faced?
Okay. Before that, I want to just mention who participate before me. How can I understand subsidies and increase the VAT system from 0 to 5%, from 5% to 10%? How can I understand the subsidies would reduce the pension benefit for all workers in Bahrain? How can I understand the subsidies with no protection to migrant workers as to include in the pension system in Bahrain? So we have to balance, not to give it from one bucket and take it from another bucket. We have to make direct. Because of that, I want to mention just this employment fund, take from employment fund system, not from government, from the sharing from all the employers, government plus workers. This is about $1 million, 300 million dinar, Bahraini dinar. This is one point. The second point, the government who would establish the flexi system. Flexi system is rejected from employers, from workers. The government imposed this system in the labor market. This flexi system failed during the corona crisis. A lot of this thousands and thousands of people who get this flexi system be in the street. This is the fact. It is accepted, not accepted, this is the fact. We in the trade union try to make a campaign to support this by mail and by something to support these people. I mentioned, I just specific about this lower class. This is lower class, which is, yes, I know this is a lot of them illegal in Bahrain. But it's in Bahrain. It is a human being. I have to deal with them. This is the second or third point. Unemployment rate, because of the crisis, increase. We just sent to the government more than 15,000 Bahraini people look for, this is job seekers, new graduate. So where is the Minister of Labor to make decent work to these people, graduate people? 75 of them women.
I hear where you're
I,
going at, but how were the trade unions add to initially solving a crisis if it faces us again?
if there is a mechanism to social dialogue, we are in Tamkeen, we are in LMRA, we are in insurance board as a board member, but no meeting. It is only one from General Federation of Bahrain Theory and more than 10 from the government. So if we say this is our vision, this is our reform, this is what we said as a worker, but if the government take by voting, we are the less. We can't gain the game if we vote by voting. I want to end with this management of GOSI. We said we have to reform, we have to govern this money of workers to increase the benefit and to save this amount of money for the retirement people. This is very bad management for this amount of money, and because of that, the benefit of GOSI reduce instead of increase. So how I can, speaking in this conference, very important conference, to saving the money without money. I want the money to save it. If there is no money, how to save it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your input on that. And I'm going to refer back to our Assistant Undersecretary from the Ministry of Labor and Social Development, Mr. Ahmed Al-Hayeki. As you have mentioned already, sir, that the components in dealing with the pandemic and any kind of wage protection is a kind of addressing that combines a lot of entities, whether it is the ministry, the workplaces, the private sector, the NGOs, trade unions, the employees themselves. And as you have mentioned also previously, everybody was actually helped during the pandemic. Also our foreign laborers that are available in different ways, of course. So what can you tell us about the challenges that the government faced in order to help everybody, as mentioned?
Thank you, Sara, again. I would like just to elaborate a little bit on what my colleague, my brother, Abu Ahmed, he mentioned, Mr. AbdelKadir from the labor union. We are working side by side with the labor union, with the Chamber of Commerce. Even the board members of LMRA, there are two from Chamber of Commerce, two from the labor unions, and four from the government. It's equal. I think we are working side by side. They are our partners, Chamber of Commerce, our partners. We listen to them. Social dialogue open for them. They can call us at any time. We have a regular meeting with them. We address all the issues. But I assure you, nobody left in the street. Nobody left without food in Bahrain. As you know, and not me, the international law also saying that. Everybody's saying that. To answer your question, the biggest challenges faced by the government is to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in workplace, and at the same time to reduce the period of closure of companies. For this purpose, Ministry of Labor and Social Development carries with other partners as well from the government firms and from labor unions and from Chamber of Commerce. We carry an inspection, we carry campaign to ensure the commitment of companies in the private sectors with health regulation, with workers working in safe haven without any problem. We give away masks and sanitizer in order to protect them, social distance been placed, and all the companies working with us along side by side. Preserve national labor from layoff. This was the biggest challenge for us. We don't want Bahraini to lose their jobs. saving the jobs was very critical and very important to us, which we know. Even Mr. AbdelKadir can mention that we saved the jobs. Maintaining unemployment rate within our average. As before the pandemic, it was almost around 1,500 Bahraini to get their jobs before the pandemic. Even during the pandemic, the government stepped up and make subsidy for the to encourage the companies to hire Bahrainis, and with subsidy for 3 years, and we place around 50%, I will say, during the pandemic, okay, which we've been doing it before the pandemic. It was around 1,500, at least every month during the pandemic, 700 people Bahraini getting their jobs. I think the, overall, the government of Bahrain succeed to get over the pandemic with the minimum damage, saving lives, health, and saving the jobs and the economy. A lot of measurement been taken from His Highness, His Majesty to His Highness. He was monitoring every day with not day by day, hour by hour, to make sure everybody in Bahrain is safe haven. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Al-Hayeki. Actually, in addition to this point, because we want to know about the challenges that were faced by the government, one of them was that there were a lot of unregistered laborers, but the government of Bahrain still made sure that everybody gets their full vaccination rights, they get their full rights to a decent living in Bahrain. What other challenges did the government find and overcome eventually, or will overcome, that might have faced people during this crisis?
I think we understand that we can learn from this experience, the pandemic. Even I would like to mention something about the Flexi Visa. The Flexi Visa, the government decide to make sure to provide the labor market with workers to be available legally, to be inspected, and with health insurance, and they are under the umbrella of the government, working on their own without interfering or forcing the Bahraini not to get the job. I think the Flexi Visa is one of the answer in order not to make them illegal, to make them at least legal according to Bahrain labor law and LMRA law as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that elaboration. I'm going to go back to the SIO. The SIO, Ms. Salma, when we look at the SIO systems, whether it is the collection and payment systems and the different mechanisms that were set in place, how can the SIO play a more elaborate role in the operations of social protection?
Thank you, Sara, for this question. Well, from our experience with the recent crisis, the SIO system proved to be the most appropriate and readily abled entity to execute collection or any payment systems and mechanism for distributing government support funds to the affected establishment, therefore to protect workers. The most important, the large database we have, the informative database we have, which has been enriched by efforts over many, many years, has proven to be the best foundation to base any mechanism of fund distribution. Also further supported by our reliable e-service portal platform and other systems in SIO.
Wonderful. I'll take this opportunity to go back to Ms. Anush. I mean, we talked about, I mean, you've heard and you've listened to the different points of view and the different approaches of our local government entities in the kingdom, which is very similar to the region itself. But from your point of view, in general, did governments of different countries, whether it's in our region or outside, do enough to actually support their citizens during this crisis?
Indeed, and I do think that they have been quite effective in supporting people in this crisis. As I mentioned, in the MENA region, across the region, the spending was 150% higher than pre-pandemic levels. And the programs that they introduced in MENA, like were in social assistance, cash transfers, about half of them, but about 30% of the programs that were introduced or in the pandemic or modified in some ways in the pandemic were in the social insurance area, yeah, like easing some of the issues with the access to the social insurance funds. But also, some of the countries actually use the pandemic to create the jobs that are maybe in a temporary nature, but they still have been useful for those like in the health sector, for example, or in the care sector. There have been new types of jobs that that came about in the pandemic. So I would say those, especially those that had the flexible and dynamic programs in place, have done very well in addressing the population needs. So in that process, there's three lessons I would suggest have been learned that would be helpful for going forward across the countries. First, having flexible and dynamic social protection and labor programs that actually are subsidized in the most effective and efficient way, and having all people having access to this program, be that informal worker, be that casual worker, or be that the expatriate worker. So include all of them. But they're not going to use it all the time. Yeah, they're only going to use the program and access the program when they need it, like we do with our health insurance. Yeah, so that was the second one, and the third one is to digitizing all the processes and having different systems to actually talk to each other and exchange information has been a very, and Madame Salma has actually mentioned that, has been very important lesson for going forward, how the modern social protection and labor system should be working. They should be talking to each other. They cannot work in isolation. And I think if we actually reach all three ingredients that are lessons that I have mentioned in the country, then we should be able to be prepared for the next shock. And let me tell you something, the next shock is already there. The war I mentioned is the next shock. Climate shocks are important. They're coming. They're coming left and right at us. Droughts are everywhere. Locust is hitting many countries. So I think if we actually go forward from this pandemic, yes, the response have been adequate where the systems are in places, not so adequate where systems are not in places. So let's use the time when we can maybe calm down a little bit with the response emergencies and help all the countries in MENA region to prepare for next one by creating flexible, dynamic, inclusive, financially sustainable, digitized social protection systems.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Just for to clarify or to ask you this as a backup question, when we look at the different responses of different countries, again, it entails a response from different entities within the countries themselves. So we're not talking just about the government sectors, but realistically we're talking about the private sectors, about the trade unions, the different NGOs. So there's always this type of bureaucracy in general in all countries of the world when it comes to dealing with certain situations. How would you address that in any kind of crisis that might face the globe generally, in talking to each other in order to find these solutions, taking into perspective each one's specialty, whether it's a government entity, an NGO, anything that faces that way?
So I assume it's addressed to me
Yes,
again?
yes, please.
Sure. So as I said, the country needs the social protection system that is forward-looking for the future and actually responsive to new ways of work we're doing. For example, the more remote work, etc., etc. So when I mean country, I actually do mean all the partners, social partners, the trade unions, different NGOs, but also citizens and people themselves, because you actually need their voice to be also included. And when you're developing the systems for the people, you actually want to consult them and create the system that is best for your country. However, different lifetimes risks need to be considered, yeah? And that's what it's fairly known, I would say, in the world, how you can cover the risk of old age, yeah? You have a social insurance program or a pensions program that people contribute to. So, but you also work with your social partners to create that system that is actually all inclusive, covering all the risks, and then everybody has access to it. So you need to communicate. So when I say that systems, that digitized systems and information systems that work talk to each other, I don't mean only the IT talking. I actually mean people talking to and communicating and outreaching to explain to everyone what we're doing.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Since we're getting to the close of this session, Mr. Shehabi, when we talk about trade unions and the representation of the different unions that you represent, what can you tell us about addressing the needs of the members of these unions when it came to these kind of crises? Were there different needs that had to be addressed? Also, what are the challenges that you foresee to overcome in the future in case something like this faces us again?
Okay, very important question. The main thing for workers to secure their job. Number one, to increase the benefit and reduce the taxes, and to be more. There is more opportunity to social dialogue with the government and the employers, because there is correlation between these two, government and employer, and this corona crisis make this correlation fail, because the government after that take from employment fund and support the companies. If they said we will pay the salary for workers, what does this mean? What does this mean? This means the supporting the companies, not the workers. Because of that, we have to increase the sharing in the labor market of public sector. We have to increase the public sector, because there's more sustainable work in the public sector, not in the private sector. And try to increase the practice in the public sector to private sector. Like this in Bahrain, we call it the big companies like Babco, Alpa, Petilco, which is the benefit like the government. We want to continue with this practice. It's okay. And increase from the small companies, take the practice from the big companies, which is good, and all the benefit. And the government have to increase the investment in the project to save the companies. If we make like this, the workers would be in the positive climate, decent work. The wages will be okay, and the environment or 4 could be okay. This is our challenges as a trade union.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for that, Mr. Shehabi. And I'd like to have a final answer from Mr. Al-Hayeki. When it comes to these kind of challenges, a lot of ways or projects have been put in place in order to deal with future challenges from now on, looking on forward. A lot of them have been overcome, but we are looking forward. So what can you tell us about projects or mechanisms that have been put in place in order to unify the dealing with such crises?
Thank you. I think, if we go back just in December or January 20 or December 19, during the beginning of COVID-19, we were here in the Ministry of Labor. We had a meeting with His Excellency the Minister and the team, and we were very worried. What's next? How much jobs we're gonna lose? But within a few weeks, His Majesty, thanks God, and His Majesty the King ordered $4.3 billion in order to help the company and the citizen and private sectors, government, everybody, in order to save lives and jobs. After now 2 years, thanks God to His Majesty, thanks God to the Crown Prince, the Prime Minister, who led the team in order to make sure the health is very important, either for Bahraini or non-Bahraini. The job is very important. Even Mr. AbdelKadir, we work together. For example, I'll give you just a story. One company, they closed one line of production. There are 17 people lost their jobs. But we got good benefit out of it for them. And we assure you to get jobs with the same level. After 1 month, when they lost their job, they got another job with the same company and better even salary. 10 people of them, they got jobs. The 7, we are working together. Just, I want to make sure, and the Minister of Labor here, jobs is very important. We work side by side with the Chamber of Commerce, with the employer, with the labor unions, in order to make it easy for them, either to create new jobs for Bahraini, EDB and Tamkeen playing big role in order to bring investors to the countries, to create jobs in order to place Bahraini. The vision of Bahrain 2030 is to make the Bahraini the first choice as for employment. We are working toward that hand by hand with our partners in order to achieve this target. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And finally, last but not least, Ms. Salma Abdurrahman Al-Sayed, from the SIO's point of view, a lot of programs and initiatives have been put into place in order to deal with these shock situations, such as the pandemic and the crisis. One of them are the providing of e-services and in providing different technologies to make it easier for people to actually have that overall look about how they're going to deal with their future now that the crisis has already hit. So what can you tell us about the programs that the SIO has put in place?
Yes, Sara. Actually, in SIO, we have our e-service portal that serves all our stakeholders, the customers, the employers, the pensioners. So this was also before the crisis, but it has been enriched during the crisis to avoid, coming to our branches. Also, we work with the government for support the workers' wages, and we are continuously seeking for innovation to finding also always alternative solution. And in the near future, the cloud computing and digital transformation for all our processes.
Perfect. That's great. At the end of the session, Mr. AbdelKadir Shehabi, what can you tell us about your prospective future outlook now with all of this information that we have gathered and with the futuristic wage programs and protection programs that have been set into place to protect the members of the unions as well as all of the members of the working society in Bahrain? We can't hear you, Mr. AbdelKadir. Unmute. Yeah.
Okay. The answer for this question depends on the decision of Parliament today. If they accept this reform, we are to go to very bad situation in Bahrain. If they reject the reform, we will be okay. This is indication. What we said, what we hope, it's okay. But what is in the ground, on the ground. We have to say the thing as it is. If the pension reduce the benefit of workers, this is bad situation for workers, for employer, for company, for all the government. Yeah. Because the ability for the labor market will be reduced. Mm-hmm. All the investment and project for restaurant, hotels, like that, everything will be low. A lot of projects will be closed because no money, no capacity for the labor or the market to make money. Mm. If we reduce the saving for pocket from anyone, retirement and worker, the other will be affected, the government and employer. This must be known. We send this message to both employer and the government. If we reach the pocket for workers, for retirement, it will be affected other parties.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your opinion on that. Mr. Al-Hayeki, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just forgot to mention one thing. Since COVID-19, we learn from it. Now our services to the job seekers online, e-services. That's why it's very important now. Before all the job seekers, they have to come to the Ministry of Labor, or they have to go to the any employment center in the country in order to apply for a job. Now they are at home. They can apply for the job. They can nominate themselves for the jobs available in the vacancy bank. They can be called from the employer, been interviewed online. They can be selected to get the job offer, from online. We are working on that. We are trying to spread our services to make it to the high standard for the Bahraini, for the young job seeker. Thank you.
Absolutely. Since we went into the subject, Ms. Anush, I actually want to get your point of view on this, because in order to face a crisis such as the pandemic and really be able to really offer people still that security, that job security, financial security, good living security, having everything online through e-services and as you have mentioned, the communication portals. Even Bahrain has a very famous communication portal that's used over and over, which is called Tawasul, where actual residents and citizens of Bahrain can communicate with any ministry. How important was how important is an implementation of e-services such as that in these kind of situations?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, many countries immediately realize that if they don't have the basic e-services in place, it's very difficult to continue operating in the times like pandemic. Yeah, as I mentioned, for example, during the pandemic, Jordan has quickly rolled out the e-wallet and also established, like Mr. Al-Hayeki said, employment services platform that is actually you can apply, but also can be matched with the different service and different jobs. And you can also they can also make references to other platforms. Yeah, so send you to unemployment insurance and other platforms. So I think it's gonna be increasingly important to have all these processes and services digitized. But there is an obviously in the poorer country there will be a challenge of the accessing this. But I think that is also resolvable by maybe having the either service center where they can access, or giving in some countries we have seen, for example, SIM cards with certain internet and phone service distributed to the people, etc., etc. But yes, very important to have the e-services, and very important to have the outreach to the people so they can actually know what the services, what are the services that are available for them. And but in one thing that I wanted to also mention, there will be always the cases that are hard reach. So it's important to also have a case management system, and also there will be always mistakes. That nobody is actually immune to have errors. So I think it's also very important to have a very good and transparent grievance mechanism, so that people can actually complain if they have a complaint and register their complaint. Yeah, so yes, digital services is the future for social protection and labor particularly, and employment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our panel members that have joined us. Ms. Anush Bezhanyan, who is the regional manager of the Social Protection and Jobs Division at in the MENA region at the World Bank Group. Also, His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Al-Hayeki, our Assistant Undersecretary at the Ministry of Labor and Social Development. Thank you very much for being with us today. Ms. Salma Abdulrahman Al-Sayyid, the Executive Director of IT Directory at the Social Insurance Organization. Thank you for elaborating on your points of view. Also, Mr. AbdelKadir Shehabi, the Chairman of the General Federation of Bahrain Trade Unions. Thank you very much for giving your point of view on all of this, and we'll see you in other sessions, inshallah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting. The pleasure is mine to be on such a distinguished panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hope to see you soon in person.
Inshallah. Thank you.